Red Script Studio presents Living Vicariously in the Trauma That Binds series. Our mess is our message. A conversation with Scott Stewart. Caution. The Trauma That Binds series contains mature subject matter that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Podcast Nation, and welcome back to another episode of the Trauma That Binds series. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Scott Stewart, professional speaker and life mentor. Scott is perfectly positioned to assist others in overcoming comparable obstacles and establishing their own power. So just one moment and we'll get Scott on the line.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Scott, how you doing today?
Good and fine, man. How am I coming in loud and clear?
Oh yeah, we're coming in really good.
Sweet. I'm glad we finally got to connect.
Yes, so am I. I do apologize for about all the rescheduling we had to do there, but we're here now. We can get to it.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. It stuff like that just it just seems to happen. So it's all good. It's all good.
Well, I appreciate it either way there, Scott. So How about we just kind of get into it here and you tell the listeners how we came to meet each other and what you're going to share with us today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I had seen your invite on a social media post, and you were starting or had been doing a newer podcast, and I don't know. I felt like just a little bit of an inner calling to say, this might be something that may be a win-win for both of us. And so I had reached out and just said, hey, your podcast is about struggles and life challenges and those kinds of things. And oh my gosh, have I had plenty of those? And so I thought, hey, Tim, let's talk. I might have some value that I can add to your show.
Well, most definitely, and sure, and that's exactly it. I did post a comment there. You'd reached out, and we got talking there. You told me your backstory, and yeah, you definitely had some struggles there. In one of our previous conversations, you mentioned you grew up in a toxic environment. What did you mean by that, and what did it kind of look like?
Yeah, so I grew up with a father that had some very intense anger issues. And my dad could go from 0 to really pissed in just seconds. And oftentimes it wasn't just really mad. Sometimes it was almost rage. And along with that, unfortunately, came some manipulative behavior, came some behavior of guilt, meaning he would use guilt almost like a weapon to get people to do what he wanted them to do. And, he, before I paint a totally horrible picture of the man, he did teach me a lot of good things too. And he taught me how to use my hands. He taught me how to work on cars, how to build stuff, how to build a house, framing, a lot of blue collar activities. But the one thing, Tim, they think that he taught me more than anything else that I am actually very thankful for, and that is he taught me about what kind of man I didn't want to be. I did not want to be like him. And so there was this very unhealthy, mentally, emotionally, and sometimes once in a while physically abusive toxicity of growing up in my house. And so that was just kind of the environment. That was the man that that gave me the example, right? As a young boy myself, as a teenager, that was the example I had set before me. So not really an ideal example,
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I don't think anybody would kind of want to follow in that type of footstep. So it's good that you recognized that behavior was wrong and didn't want to continue that. But unfortunately, your father did continue that behavior. And again, you mentioned August 5th, 1991. That was a significant date for you that you mentioned to me. What happened then, if you don't mind me asking again?
Sure, of course. And before I directly answer that, I want to let me just lead up to that for a moment, if I may.
For sure.
Because that what I'm going to share with that is a pretty big bomb, if you will. The older I got, as I got closer to moving out of the house around the age of 18, my father's anger was slowly but definitely becoming stronger. And the moments of rage, if there is such a thing, that rage would sometimes look like times two. And so the older I got, the worse he got. And it was clear to me that he, well, I'll say it this way. The man who raised him and then the man who raised him, this is just a pattern, right? These men, so would hence be my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, there's a pattern. They followed the pattern. They followed the example of what was given to them. Now, I don't say that to make excuses for anybody's bad behavior, but I say that to kind of give you a backstory of where did this all come from. And by the time I had moved out of the house, for me, it was a beautiful thing because I was no longer, I no longer had to deal with his temper tantrums and his yelling and screaming and throwing things. And, at least I only had to deal with it like once a week or once every 2 weeks when I saw him. But I had moved out at the age of 18. And to kind of fast forward, he and my mom were now having marital trouble, as you might imagine, right? I mean, it would be very, very difficult for any woman to live with that kind of a man, the picture that I've painted of him. And my mom, they come from that old school. You work through things, you fix things, you don't just throw things away. And she was really, really adamant that, this is my house, right? The house that I grew up in, the house that they bought together, brand new. She was not going to leave that house. And if we're going to split up and divorce, he's leaving. This is my house. And that was her attitude. Well, as things progressed, now we fast forward to your question of, August 5th of 1991. It was a Monday night, and I was scheduled to go have dinner with them after my workday. So I met them there, some at their house, the house that I grew up in, somewhere around 6:30-ish. We had dinner. It was like, in fact, actually, my dad was quite pleasant. He wasn't throwing any temper tantrums. It was quite pleasant. And I remember very clearly, we had spaghetti and homemade French bread. It was fantastic. And it was like, it was an actual very pleasant couple hours I spent with them talking. And, that was back in the days of you call out of your county or out of town and everything was long distance. So, I remember using mom and dad's phone to make, some calls because it wasn't long distance. Anyway, we got, we were done for the evening and we talked and whatnot. And I was getting ready, said goodbye. And I was getting ready to walk to the door. My mom followed me and followed me to the front door. And, I was 22 years old and I remember her saying, "Come here, you. Give me a hug." And I turned around literally right there at the door entryway, gave her a hug, gave her a kiss on the cheek and said, "I love you." And she said, "I love you back." And what I didn't know was that was going to be the last time I'd ever see her. And later that night, in what I believe to be just a fit of rage, and that would have been somewhere around 9:30-ish, maybe 10 p.m. While she lay in her bed, he went into the garage and he got a steel bar. It was about 2.5 feet long, and he assaulted her in a really, really ugly way. It was very brutal. And as you might imagine, everything changed, right? I mean, you take someone else's life, and the whole world just shifts. At least it did for me. And he self-inflicted some wounds on himself, and I'm going to speed this story along because I don't know that we need to get into all the details of it.
Scott, it's just whatever you're comfortable with. We don't have to go into any details. I'm feeling this heartache for you, so you just you need to, if you need to take a breath, take a minute. That's absolutely fine, brother. It's some very, very heavy stuff, man. Like, you were open about it with me in the email, and you're being very open about it during this cast right now. And I commend you for that. And I just want to ask, just maybe kind of segue away from that. How are you finding this strength and resilience to be so open about this situation, given how hard that it is for you?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So, there's a few answers for that, Tim. This happened quite a long time ago. I mean, we're going back all the way to 1991, right? So there's been a tremendous amount of water that has gone under the bridge since that time, and I had to. After I call it the house of cards came crashing down, I kind of went into a tailspin, as I think anybody would. I never dove into the drugs or anything like that. I, heavy into drinking, self-medicating, just to be able to get through it. But there came a time where I just knew that I knew in my heart, I just knew I was headed down a really dark path. And it wasn't going to end good if I didn't change that, right? And so sometimes, I'm a man of faith, and I believe that sometimes God puts people in our life at just the right time when we need them. And for me, that was somebody at work who kind of redirected me and said, "Brother, you can't keep doing what you're doing. This is going to end with your obituary if you don't change direction." And I knew he was right. So, I started going to counseling. Now, I say that to say I wanted to do that because I knew for me that if I did not start dealing with all of this stuff, if I did not start dealing with all of the hurt, anger, resentment, bitterness, all the times, my dad embarrassed me, humiliated me, hit me, guilted me, manipulated me. Oh my gosh, Tim, the list goes on and on. I just kind of knew that if I didn't deal with this was going to haunt me for the rest of my life. And as simple as that may sound, it really was I just knew that I knew. Sometimes, Tim, you ever have a thing where sometimes you have this feeling that you're like, I just know that I know that I know, and I can't be told different. Have you ever had that happen?
10 out of 10, of course.
Yeah. So that was me. That was me with all of this stuff. And so I started going to counseling and started to what I call undo everything my father had done for all those years. And we're a lot like a computer program. And until you change the computer program, you're going to repeat the program that's running in your head. And hence, my father, he ran the computer program that his father gave him and that his father gave him. And I just really made a decision, like I said, a few minutes ago, that my dad taught me the kind of person I didn't want to be. And I just knew that I needed to change the program. And so I went into counseling. I started getting into personal development, really paying attention to my own thoughts, my own beliefs about what I believe is true, about myself and about other people and about what it is to be a man, right? And so it was that counseling and some of the personal development that just really set my life on a whole new course. So if that long answer to the question.
No, that's perfect there, Scott, because exactly once you make that choice, then the rest is kind of history, because it's almost like if you're kind of forced into the situation, it's just like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm being told to do it. But once you come to that realization that, yes, I need this, I want this to become better, then that's when you start becoming better, because you have that mindset to be able to change or break that cycle from your ancestry.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it all starts with the, I'm not part of the AA organization, but one of their top things is they say, and I believe it's universal truth, is that you have to want to. If you don't want to do anything, and that is if you don't want to get better, if you don't want to overcome, if you don't want to forgive somebody, if you don't want to stop drinking, if you don't want to make yourself a better person, you won't. It's just that simple. And I'm nobody special. I'm nobody that no different than anybody else. But I wanted to. I really wanted to get past all this stuff and deal with it and then heal from it. And so back to your question of, I've talked about this a lot. I've shared this story, not in this format, Tim, but in a different format. I've spoken in front of churches, men's groups, women's groups, in front of networking group, in front of corporations, nonprofits, and just talking about, how do you overcome some of life's most horrible, horrible things. And I think the fact that if anybody, if you want to get through it, that's the first step. And it's substantial. And you got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say that, yes, I want to.
You're absolutely right. And I was actually going to make that correlation between what you had mentioned with the AA as well, because exactly, it's a mindset thing. What I've come in contact with is, have you ever heard of Hermetic philosophy?
I've heard that term, Tim, but I'm not familiar with it.
Basically, what the basics of it is, the universe, we all are a thought, like a mind thought, and that is why manifestation and your willpower and things coming in together like that plays such a huge role in things like this, right? Because if you think it's going to happen, or you change that mindset, like, yes, I choose, I want, that, then it will hopefully come to fruition. But it's, again, it's just one of those philosophies. It's based off of Hermes.
Okay.
But it's quite an interesting shtick if you're ever interested in deciding to find something that correlates. So if we can maybe get back to what we were talking about earlier, just maybe not in so great a detail, about 2 weeks after that incident, you went and visited your father, right?
That is correct, yes.
And did he say anything towards what had happened? Did he confess? Did he care?
Yeah. The as if the story couldn't get any more crazier. it certainly is about to, right? So it was about 2 weeks after everything happened there with the death of Mom, and he was in the local county jail. And my sister, half sister, but sister, she said, I have to go see him. She hadn't seen him in probably close to a year. She said, I want to look in his eyes, and I need to see for myself, or experience for myself, if he actually did this. Because, there's a little bit of denial that people would have. And so she said, would you go with me? And I said, sure. So we drove down to the county jail, and I remember sitting there looking, just like what you would see in the movies, right? There's the glass, there's the phone. You're what, 4 or 5 feet apart, and there's this glass wall between you, or plexiglass, whatever. And I remember looking at him and just being so numb, just almost in disbelief, just not even really knowing what to say or whatnot. And he looked at me in our probably 5-7 minute conversation. In the middle of that, he looked at me. And he looked right into my eyes. I'll never forget it. And he said, do you think I killed your mom? And I said, I don't know what to believe. I'm still feeling like this is a nightmare, and I'm hoping to wake up from it. I just genuinely didn't know. I was so numb. And he looked right at me and he said, he goes, I didn't. He said, but I told the police I did to cover up for you because I thought you did it.
What?
Can't make this stuff up.
Jesus.
So remember in the beginning of this conversation, or this interview, Tim, I told you he was a very manipulative guy.
Right.
And that is a telltale sign of manipulation. You try to make the other person question their own sanity, question their own humanity, question their own motives. And that's exactly what that statement did. Was he was trying to manipulate me. He was trying to twist the truth. And that was that was really the last time I had any interaction with him. I just kind of sat there in disbelief of what I had just heard, and he said a few other things, and I don't even remember what he'd said, but that was the end of that was the last conversation face to face that I had with him, and that would have been that would have been somewhere near or close to the end of August, there at the jail. Yeah.
Uh, God, I don't even have any words for that story, man. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
well, there's just, if you can define it as crazy, yeah, but I'm pretty sure there's something worse for it. But
Yeah, I
right?
I think evil is probably a bit more of an accurate,
Description.
yeah, it really is. And so, yeah, those, but to kind of move the story along,
Yeah.
there was even some more stuff that happened, and I'm just going to brush over it lightly. But when it rains, it pours. And about 3 months, 4 months later, we had some in the through the family and family friends. We had some at that time. They would have been teenagers or late teenagers, but there was three young teenage girls that had come forward and basically, in short, had said, yeah, he inappropriately touched me and got me to do this and got me to do that. And so there was some physical abuse, going on with, and these girls would have been very young when this had happened. So they were coming forth years later. So, all of that, it paints the picture of this man who raised me, and just very evil, very disturbed, just a very cold heart. And those kinds of things, if a person does not intentionally or does not become intentional about processing them and working through them, man, it'll just destroy you. I think Tim, you and I both have seen people, we've had friends, maybe it's family, maybe it's people we went to school with, that had horrible things done to them. And I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, and there's been some people that have had some very, very ugly, horrible, evil things done to them. And the only thing we have after those things have happened, the only thing we have is how we respond to it. You can't go back, rewind the clock. You can't go back, wish it had never happened. You can't bury it in the closet. You can't bury it down deep and pretend it's not there and never talk about it, because that doesn't work. It'll just show up, in some other format. And these were things that I worked through of all of the, extreme anger, resentment. There were countless times where I had just thought, if he ever gets out of jail, I'm going to make sure that he never hurts another person again.
Well, I think
That
would be an understandable thought for anybody.
Very, very much, right? And so those are things. Those are very. I call them. They're very human interactions. They're human thoughts. They're human feelings that we have, and it doesn't make you bad to have them. It just makes you human. The difference is, how do we manage that? How do we overcome that? Do we let it grab hold, or do we intentionally choose something different? And in my case, it took a while, but I was able to forgive the man. I forgave him for all the horrible stuff he did. And was that easy? Oh, of course, hell no, of course not. Of course it wasn't easy. No, did it take some time? Oh yeah, it took years. You'd asked me just a little bit ago, though, how do you get through something like that? And I think one of the big keys is forgiveness. And that's been one of my best friends, I guess, if you will, right? The ability to be able to forgive somebody for murdering my mom. And I think people have, some people, not all, but they have a very misunderstanding or an inaccurate belief of what forgiveness is and who it's for. And I believe this, Tim, and I'm not saying this as a motivational speaker. I'm not saying this as just a cool little meme. I'm saying this because I actually believe it, and that is this: I believe anything is forgivable if you hold the correct belief about what forgiveness is.
And I can appreciate that. And you're absolutely right, because there's not a lot of people that know what true forgiveness is. And if you're able to work through that and forgive your father for doing something like that, then I commend you for that as well. It is not easy, especially after something like that, right? And while I'm thinking of it, when we were emailing back and forth, you had mentioned, what was it, 7 categories or 7 factors in identifying forgiveness?
There's I've identified a handful of different areas where I believe people, they either get stuck, or they just flat out don't have an accurate understanding of what forgiveness is. And so I've identified those areas. And do you want me just to go over them real quick?
Yeah, whatever you'd like there, Scott. If you want to go over them quick or in detail, or you know what, pick the main ones that you think will be of most benefit to the listeners.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, you bet, absolutely. So I think let's start out with the obvious one, and sometimes is the hardest one, but I think it is, because if you don't get this one right, the other pieces of it are very difficult to get through, and that is this. Forgiveness has nothing to do with the person, it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with us. It has to do with the person that is forgiving, because what I'm doing is I am essentially releasing all of that hurt and the anger and the resentment that I held towards my father. So I'm releasing that. It had nothing to do with him, whether he asked for forgiveness or not. And by the way, he never did. He never did. He went to his grave. He never asked me. That is irrelevant, whether he were to ask me for forgiveness or not, because forgiveness is not about him. Forgiveness is about me. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, yeah, because it's kind of just making peace of it with yourself, so you're able to move on with it, type of thing, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So whether the person is remorseful, whether or not they ask you, whether or not their behavior has changed, is completely irrelevant. That has nothing to do with it. My father's, even though he went to jail and he spent 20 years in prison, even after he got out, his manipulation, his guilt, his anger issues, he never changed. And I forgave him anyway. Why is that? Because none of that mattered. None of that mattered. I didn't rebuild a relationship with him. I just let go. I let go of all of that anger and that hurt for me. I didn't do it for him. I did it for me. So I think that's the number one. That's the biggest thing. I think another piece to this is that sometimes people get forgiveness and reconciliation. They put that in the same box, meaning if I'm going to forgive somebody, that now I have to reconcile with them. Absolutely, you do not. Reconciliation and trust, for that matter, are not the same thing as forgiveness. You can forgive somebody, and you are not required to trust them again. You are not required to reconcile the relationship. That's not an element of forgiveness. And I think sometimes people get that mixed up. Another piece is that sometimes people think about forgiveness as they say, well, I'm not going to forgive them because they're going to get a free pass if I forgive them, right? Have you ever heard that one?
The free pass,
yeah, the free pass. Like, no, wait a minute, hold on, no. Who said that? Who sold? And then just respectfully, but in light, trying to be lighthearted to your listeners. If you have that belief that you think you're going to forgive somebody and now they just automatically got a free pass, that is not an accurate, healthy belief of what forgiveness is. That doesn't excuse them for anything.
You're absolutely right. It doesn't excuse it. Just because you forgive it doesn't mean you're going to put up with it again. It doesn't mean they're allowed to do it again.
That's correct. Another piece is that I heard this one time. Oh my gosh, I was still quite young, and I was still trying to work through my forgiving my father. And I was sitting in this little church I was new to, and I heard this. The pastor was giving this sermon on forgiveness, and this lady, she was kind of in the row ahead of me, kind of off to the side, and I heard her. I'll never forget this. She said, She said, that's right. She said, if you haven't forgotten about it, you haven't forgiven them. I remember like, what the hell did she just say? Serious.
No,
I was like,
that doesn't make
yeah,
any sense to me either.
it doesn't make any sense. It's like, wait a minute, hold on. If you haven't forgotten about it, you haven't forgiven them? What? I don't know where that lie comes from, but how I think I think it's just a very toxic belief. That's my own opinion. That because here's why. You can have the most horriblest things done to you, and you are not required to forgive them, or excuse me, forget. You're not required to forget that. No one ever said that you have to forget it. In fact, I would say that trying to forget it is probably not. I don't know the value of that. I don't think there's any good that comes from that, because if you've forgiven something, if you've worked through the process, you can remember well. And I've sat here and shared with you now for, holy cow, what are we, just over a half hour, and I'm not stirred up. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm not resentful. I don't have tears in my eyes. That doesn't mean I'm not sad on, that my mom's not here, but I've never forgotten any of this. And forgetting is not a requirement of forgiveness. And if somebody, for the listeners, if somebody has tried to sell you on that false philosophy, I call BS. No, you're not required to forget. That is not part of forgiveness. Those are two very separate things.
Well, and as you're mentioning that there, what comes to my mind is the phrase, if you don't know your past, you won't have a future.
I've heard that one before. That's a good one.
Right?
Right.
So that's kind of
Absolutely.
That's what came to my mind when you were speaking towards that. I think that kind of fit well.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. That's a great one, Tim. I think another piece here is that, and I'm speaking from raw experience when I say this, and I believe this: forgiveness is not always a one-time thing. And here's what I mean by that. If someone has offended you in a really, really hurtful, very traumatic way, that the feelings that we get when we think about those events, they're going to rise up again. And just because if you have in your heart, if you said, I'm going to forgive this person for hurting me, for abusing me, for stealing from me, whatever the situation is, betraying me, if I'm going to forgive this person, sometimes we will need to forgive them over and over and over and over again. And it's a choice. It's as simple as a choice, because those feelings they're going to come back up again. And when we think about that event and we think about the hurt and we put ourselves in the moment, in our mind, we're picturing what he did to me, what she did to me, what my father did. We picture that, it's going to stir an emotion. It's going to stir a memory and a feeling. And it's in that process, it's in that moment, we have a choice. And that choice is, am I going to hang on to this bitterness? Am I going to hang on to this hurt? Or am I going to forgive that person once again? And I will tell you, Tim, I didn't keep track, but I will bet you over the course of probably 8 or 9 years, I probably forgave my father I don't know, somewhere between 100 to 150 times.
I'm surprised it wasn't even more than that.
Yeah, well, and it may have been, right?
Right?
It may have been. Yeah, because I didn't want to hold on to that anger. That's me. It doesn't make me better than anybody else. I'm just like an average Joe, but I didn't want to hang on to that, And again, remember what I said in the beginning. My father taught me what kind of man I didn't want to be, and this fell under that umbrella. Is that I did not want to be angry. I did not want to be like him. I didn't want to be, pissed at the world or when something didn't go my way. And so because of that, I had to choose many, many, many times that, I'm just not going to hang on to this. And was that easy? Was that comfortable? No. No, of course not. And again, I said it took 8, 9, shoot, it might have even been 10 years, but still a choice. And anybody who is listening to this, and there's people, Tim, there's people that have had even worse stuff, way worse stuff happen to them than me. But I still say the same thing to everybody. We still have a choice. And, which leads me to the very last, I think what is probably I mean, we could talk about this all day, but one of the last pieces to it is that forgiveness is a process. And what may be easier for you may be harder for me, and vice versa. And I think sometimes people don't, they're a little too hard on themselves. They're like, well, it's been 2 years and I'm still angry at my former boss because he fired me and unjustly, right? Or I'm still mad at my spouse because they betrayed me and they had an affair, and I had all of this taken from me, and they're still angry and they're still mad. And I understand that. I absolutely understand that. Forgiveness is a process. Now, it's also something we have to work on. You can't just sit there and hope that enough water goes underneath the bridge to one day go, I'm healed. I'm healed. It's all better. Woohoo. There's
It's
been
a
enough water under the
miracle.
bridge. Yeah, it's a miracle. That doesn't, okay, folks, that's not how it works. That helps. I think that helps. But if you're hell bent on holding on to the anger because you want to be right, because you want to hold on to the bitterness, your ego, your pride, I get that. I get all of that. I'm not trying to be mean to people, but I experienced all of that stuff as well. And if you want to hold on to that, you're not going to be able to move through the process. That's just not how it works. There's this old saying says, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Yeah.
I choose happy.
No, and that's absolutely right. You got to choose happy. And if I can, Scott, I just want to go backtrack on something you said about your trauma being less, or people having worse trauma than yourself, right? If I can give any piece of advice, try not to think that way, because trauma is trauma. It's perceived by the person. It's how it is in the instant and how it affects them. I was talking to a potential, confirmed guest now, Dante, and he was telling me a story that one of his friends, his dad or uncle had passed away, and then that really affected him to the point where a couple months later he decided to take his own life. And
oh my gosh,
right? And for him, it just took one death, and it didn't matter, right? But you've got all these other people. You've got me. I don't know if you've heard some of my podcasts, you said, and then you got that war veteran there. He had some serious stuff happen. I even thought my crap was less important than him. But when he's telling me the story, his story, what happened to him over in Iraq, and when he got home with his domestic violence situation, and it hurt me and it broke me, because I could feel for that guy because I've been there.
Yeah.
But he's at the end of it, he's like, Tim, I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I appreciate you letting me talk. And I'm just like, what do you mean? Your trauma's worse than mine. Like, holy shit. Like, right?
Right.
So, and he's like, Tim, it doesn't matter. Trauma is trauma.
Trauma is trauma. Yeah. Boy, that's good advice. Gosh. Yeah. And what is it really is, that's a really good point. The more I think about it, Tim, really what it is how it affects us. It regardless of what the outside circumstance would happen. What happened is what's the lasting effect it has on us? What is our ability to heal or cope with it and just manage it, work through it? And that's different. That's different for everybody. There is no way, the one size fits all. It's just very, very different for each of us.
Well, exactly. And that's why there's so many different types of therapies and counseling and medicines to kind of combat whatever the issues may be. And some work, some don't. And it's just kind of up to you to figure out what works best for you.
Right. Yeah.
right?
For sure.
Now, with your career as a professional speaker and advocate for personal development, how do you use your experience to empower people?
Yeah, the I think when it really comes down to in that area is what we believe. And one thing personal development has really how it has really changed my life, which has helped me to affect others, is belief. What we believe is a very, very powerful thing. I think most people downplay it. They don't fully understand it because if what we believe to be true guides our whole entire life, it guides our behavior. It guides how we walk through life. Is that belief? What we believe on the inside is really a direct reflection of what you see on the outside. How you see people behave, how you see them interact with others is just a result of what's on the inside. And in fact, I would argue that the two cannot be incongruent for very long. I can put on an act. I can put on an act for a short time and fool Tim, but not for very long because it's not how we're wired. And so the personal development piece of helping me to have a healthy belief about myself, about relationships, about what a man is, about the way a man should treat a woman, about the way a father should treat his kids, about the way a father, the example that he should set for his children, the loving, caring, supportive spouse he should be for his wife. That has made all the difference in the world for me because the example I was given was very, very poor. And when you come from that space and you live in that space, it's just normal, right? It's like, well, isn't everybody like this? I mean, my father on a Sunday night, very, very common. In fact, I remember very few Sunday nights. My father would sit at the end of the couch in his favorite spot in the front room as I grew up, and he'd have a Penthouse magazine. That was Sunday nights. As I sat there and watched TV, he would go through his magazine, and I grew up thinking, well, doesn't every dad do that?
Right.
Yeah, and that was just normal. In fact, for years I used to think other dads did it. Like, well, no, wait a minute. So his belief was to some extent that was okay. That wasn't damaging. It wasn't harming anybody because maybe he kept it to himself or whatever. But when you start to understand how belief works and how it affects those around us, those we love the most, you start to get a little intentional about the way you walk in the world and how you want to be an example to other people. I want to be an example to colleagues, to the people I work with, to the customers I serve, to the clients, to the audience that I speak to. I want to be an example. And a lot of that is through belief, because I believe that somebody has to set the right example. Somebody has to be the encourager. Somebody has to be there to come alongside other people and go, hey, it's okay. I've been through some of this horrible crap like you. And there is hope. There is forgiveness on the other side of that. And then the personal development piece has really helped me to do that, as opposed to where the counseling piece helped me get my head right, right? Help me to deal with all my baggage, all of the hurts and the anger and why, like I said, all the things my dad did, I had to undo. And the counseling helped me to do that. So they were very compatible and collaborative in my own life.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, I'm glad that was the situation for you there. And when you were going through your process and whatnot, as we were talking, well, and as you had just mentioned about being like appropriate spouse and father and whatnot, you had mentioned that your wife and daughters were quite instrumental in your healing process. Did you want to try and give a example on how that was?
Yeah, for sure. So I married a little, compared to most people, I married a little later in life, and that was very intentional because I wanted. I knew I didn't have to be perfect, but I knew I had to be healthy. I knew that I had to deal with my baggage and I had to clean out my closet and all of those things. And so to me, being married to a woman was this comes with not only a commitment, this comes with a responsibility, dude. That's how I saw that. This is not just, she's cool. I think we got enough in common, and we're gonna get married. It was much more for me than that. It was I had an obligation to be and become a healthy spouse. I, you know, I, it's astonishing to me that sometimes people they look at their spouse as someone who is going to help them become healthy. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. You want them to walk with you, support you, encourage you through this process. That's great. And I don't necessarily know there's anything wrong with that. But the question that I kept asking myself was, why is it their responsibility? They didn't go through all this shit when they didn't have all this trauma. Why aren't isn't it my job to kind of to complement her? I needed to be healthy. Not saying I needed to be a superstar. I just needed to be healthy. Because if I'm toxic, right? If I'd have followed the same footsteps as my father, and then I bring that into the marriage, how is that supporting her? How is that helping her to become a better mom, a better wife, a better person? How does that help? And it doesn't. And I saw that. I just was able to see that and go, okay, I don't have to be perfect here, but I gotta get my crap together. So for me, entering into marriage is that I wanted it to work. I wanted to be the right kind of spouse. I wanted to be the right kind of husband for my wife on that front. The other piece in regards to my kids is that I went through in I think it was 14. My father was a huge outdoorsman, hunting, fishing. And I remember we were on an elk hunting trip in eastern Oregon. And my job prior to the hunting trip was to get all the stuff loaded up into the Jeep, the axes, the chains, the chainsaw gas and oil and tools, straps and come-alongs, right? I mean, all those things you would need for a hunting trip. That was my job. And I remember I had forgotten something. And I remember my dad, when we got to elk camp, I remember that he went looking for something and I had forgotten to put it in the Jeep. And he absolutely unloaded on me out in the, we're 30 miles from the nearest paved road. And he just unloaded on me and just belittled me, humiliated me, embarrassed me in front of all of the family and everybody at elk camp. And I had remember that was one of those life-changing moments. We've all had them. We've all had a moment in our life where we said, this stops here and things will never be the same. And that was that moment for me. And I remember going off, just walking away, feeling so humiliated. And I kind of made a promise, I think in my heart and my soul, even, to God at that point. I didn't even know who God was, but I said, I will never raise my kids like this. Never. I will not be that man. And it was so profound, Tim. It was so soul moving. And I stuck to it. I was like 14 years old, right? I was still just a kid, didn't even know what I was committing to, but that it was so powerful to me that I kept that promise to myself. And raising two daughters in a completely different manner as to how my father raised me. That moment, that episode in Eastern Oregon was the moment of change. That I just said, I will never raise my kids like this. And I didn't. I've been kind of, on the other end of the spectrum with that. And so I had things, that were just different drivers for me so that I wanted to break the cycle. And I hope that, anybody listening to this for wherever you're at, whatever you've gone through, whatever you're feeling right now, that think hard about breaking the cycle. If there is a cycle there, right? Because not only is it life changing, but it affects so many other people if you break that cycle. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it's worth it. I'm saying it's well worth it. And it was my wife and raising children that helped me to do that.
I appreciate that, Scott. Now, would that be your kind of one message that you'd give to folks who are struggling to find forgiveness in the wake of their own traumatic experiences? Or do you have something a little more specific towards that you wanted to say for kind of our last remarks? Because unfortunately, we are getting to about an hour now.
Sure.
But
sure.
It's been great, Scott. And I appreciate you coming on. So what do we have for our listeners here for our last message?
Yeah, I think I'm going to highlight just a couple small things. I don't know if they're small things, but a couple things that we've spoken about already. And that is, if you want to make some changes in your life, the first thing is you have to want to. And that doesn't mean that you just like to, or as long as it doesn't feel uncomfortable, I'm willing to do it. Or as long as it's not too hard, or I don't have to put too much energy into it, I'd like to make some changes. No, that's not how it works. That's really not how it works. You have to really, really want to. And I think I'm going to encourage some people to find that place for themselves that they really want to. And sometimes that might mean putting in boundaries. That's one thing we never even talked about, but we maybe another time. But is sometimes you can't heal if someone's continually being toxic to you. At least that's my experience. If I'd have continued a relationship with my father, I would have never been able to heal. And so sometimes we have to set boundaries. Sometimes we have to cut people out of our life, and that's okay. That's not being selfish. That's not being mean, regardless of what you've been told. It's okay to cut people out of your life who are keeping you from peace and the ability to forgive. And I think lastly on this is that understand something, that in forgiveness is a process. And of those areas that I talked about, it's easy to get stuck sometimes in them. And usually when we get stuck, not always, but usually it revolves around a belief that we hold on to. And an inaccurate belief, an unhealthy belief will stop us. It'll stop us in the process of being able to forgive some of the most horrible things. So recognize that. And, it's okay. It's okay to feel the things you're feeling. It's okay. That's normal. But still make a choice. Make a choice that says, you know what, I'm choosing to forgive anyway, even though I don't feel like it. I don't want to hang on to this anger. And I think that's about the best that I can leave folks with, Tim, is you got to want to give yourself some grace and make a choice that your peace, your happiness is worth so much more than holding on to the anger and the bitterness. It's worth so much more. And you're speaking from someone who's lived it, who's experienced it. So anyway, I hope that helps somebody.
Oh, I'm sure it will. This conversation has definitely helped me, Scott. It's given me insight to even some of the stuff that I've gone through, and now it's put in the overdrive of my overthinking of what what could have done differently, what I could have done better. And I appreciate this. This has been really great, really powerful, Scott. So how about, we keep in touch. And again, you had just mentioned earlier when you were saying maybe next time I'll host, Scott, I hope there is a next time. Plan on doing a kind of an update kind of season, see where everybody's at, to whoever were confirmed and has done their episode. And I'd like to keep in touch maybe a couple months down the line. Hey, Scott, how's it going? Want to do your version 2 or update 2 type of thing? I think that'd be great.
That sounds great, Tim. I would welcome it and look forward to it.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll keep in touch and we'll set that up soon. And you have yourself a great rest of the day, Scott, okay?
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Scott. I very much appreciate this.
Bet. Likewise.
Bye now. And that was professional speaker and life coach Scott Stewart, everybody. If you'd like to follow Scott or learn more about the process of overcoming life's most horrible events, you can find him on LinkedIn, Facebook as Scott Stewart, encourager, speaker, overcomer, and coach, or visit his website at www.scottstewartspeaking.com. This has been Living Vicariously in the Trauma That Binds series. Our mess is our message. A conversation with Scott Stewart. Production copyright 2024 by Tim Douglas, proprietor of Red Script Studios. If you love what we do, please support our cast by donating, becoming a patron, or by purchasing studio merchandise. Living Vicariously in the Trauma That Binds series is a nonprofit division of Red Script Studios. If you have a story you would like shared, consider reaching out to the studio. We would love to connect. Until next time.